So this is the big benefit of a universal philosophy. It says it applies to everybody. Well, looks that doesn't, 205 or 206 countries in the world. And you've got something that applies to everybody. That's a bit strange, isn't it? No, says liberal theory. There are same value structures that apply to all of us. You couldn't have the United Nations without it. It couldn't tell you that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights without this idea of values that apply to all of us just because we are humans. Now, the idea is to test that as well. Why is sport universal? Why does everybody play football? It's because the values are specified at a very thin level at the top. There are these rules and we all have to abide by just these rules. But there are lots of things about football that aren't rules specified. So Brazilian football is different from Italian football, from British football, from German football, from Spanish football. It's culturally specific but acknowledges that there are these universal general rules to apply to everybody. It's rare to find an adult who actively still wonders what their parents think. But that isn't to say that we aren't wondering about our value in more general terms. It's just that we may, without noticing, have taken the question somewhere else and very often, to particularly harsh modern figures of authority, media and social media. To this pitiless arena, the self-doubting person now directs all their fears of unworthiness and panic desire for reassurance. To a system set up to reward sadism and malice. They constantly raise their phones and implicitly ask, do I deserve to exist? Am I okay? Am I beautiful or respectable enough? And, because social media is built on the troubles of the individual soul, the verdict is never a reliable yes. One is never done with cycles of fear and reassurance seeking. Every time their spirits sink, which is often, the self-doubting sufferer picks up their phone and begs to know whether they have permission to go on. If this might be us, we should grow curious about, and jealous of, people who are free. They are so because someone long ago settled the question of what they were worth and the answer has seemed solid ever since. Take a look outside a window. What is the season where you are? How do you know? Most likely, you looked at a tree or plant and noticed details about its leaves and assessed the qualities of sunlight streaming outside. Observing the timing of biological events in relation to changes in season and climate is called phenology. When you notice the daffodil buds are poking through the snow and think spring is on its way, you're using phenology. When you see leaves turn from green to red, and watch migrating birds fly past, and realize that summer is over, autumn is here, you're using phenology. Literally meaning the science of appearance. Phenology comes from the Greek words pheno, to show or appear, and logos, to study. Humans have relied on phenology since the time of hunters and gatherers. We've watched changes in seasons to know when to plant and harvest food and when to track migrating animals. Scientists observe and document seasonal changes in nature and look for patterns in the timing of seasonal events. Timing of these natural signs has remained consistent until recently. Increasing global temperature is causing rhythms of nature to shift. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, is the main greenhouse gas in climate change. So how does CO2 get into our atmosphere? Well, carbon is part of a cycle. It starts with the sun, which heats the Earth's surface with more energy in 1 hour than the whole world uses in a year. Plants, which are kind of like biological chefs, take that sunlight and then suck in some CO2 from the air, mix them together, and bam! They create a stored form of energy, in the form of carbohydrates such as glucose and sucrose. The process is called photosynthesis. When animals like us eat those plants, our stomachs convert that food back into energy for our own growth. Greenhouse gases are a byproduct of this process, and are released through waste. If those plants die, they decompose, and tiny microorganisms break down those carbohydrates and again, release greenhouse gases as a byproduct. As you see, energy originates from the sun. It is then transferred as it moves through the food chain. But sometimes, carbon-based organisms like plants or animals get stuck in the earth. The major currency of our reward system is dopamine, an important chemical or neurotransmitter. There are many dopamine receptors in the forebrain, but they're not evenly distributed. Certain areas contain dense clusters of receptors, and these dopamine hotspots are a part of our reward system. Drugs like alcohol, nicotine, or heroin send dopamine into overdrive, leading some people to constantly seek that high, in other words, to be addicted. Sugar also causes dopamine to be released, though not as violently as drugs. And sugar is rare among dopamine-inducing foods. Broccoli, for example, has no effect, which probably explains why it's so hard to get kids to eat their veggies. Speaking of healthy foods, let's say you're hungry and decide to eat a balanced meal. You do, and dopamine levels spike in the reward system hotspots. But if you eat that same dish many days in a row, dopamine levels will spike less and less, eventually leveling out. That's because when it comes to food, the brain evolved to pay special attention to new or different tastes. While a written word might have multiple definitions, we can usually determine its intended meaning through context. In speech, however, a word can take on additional layers of meaning. Tone of voice, the relationship between speakers, and expectations of where a conversation will go can imbue even words that seem like filler with vital information. This is where and come in. Or A and M, Tudo and 66, Edo and Año, linguists call these filled pauses, which are a kind of hesitation phenomenon. And these seemingly insignificant interruptions are actually quite meaningful in spoken communication. For example, while a silent pause might be interpreted as a sign for others to start speaking, a filled pause can signal that you're not finished yet. Hesitation phenomena can buy time for your speech to catch up with your thoughts, or to fish out the right word for a situation. And they don't just benefit the speaker, a filled pause lets your listeners know an important word is on the way. Linguists have even found that people are more likely to remember a word if it comes after a hesitation. Hesitation phenomena aren't the only parts of speech that take on new meaning during dialogue. Last week we talked about how people recognize objects and really how well people recognize objects, given how difficult the problem is, given how objects can be seen in all different sorts of illumination, in different positions, in different angles. And yet we are able to extract that information, we are able to take the visual stuff out there, interpret it in a way that allows us to recognize all the different things that we can see in our environment. Today we're going to kind of carry on looking at that, but we're going to look at what's really a special class of objects. That's the human face. So we're going to look at how we recognize human faces and how we do it quite as well as we do. We're really expert at recognizing faces. So again we can think about how do we take that visual information and how do we transform it into a form which allows us to put a name to a face, and to do all the other clever things that we can do with faces. So I'm going to start off again by just pointing out that it's a hard problem. Face recognition is a hard problem, and it's a clever thing we do. If you think about all the different types of faces you can recognize, and all the different types of information you can get from the face. But what exactly happens to your body when you're in a coma? First we have to be clear that comas are very different from sleep. Despite the fact that the origin of the word comes from the Greek for coma, or deep sleep, comas are not sleep however and are instead various forms of unconsciousness that render a person unable to respond to any external stimuli. You can play the loudest heaviest death metal in the world right next to someone who's comatose, and you won't succeed in doing anything except really annoying the neighbors. Likewise you can even physically hurt people in a coma and they will remain completely oblivious and unresponsive. In times not too distant past this was sometimes used as treating, with doctors trying to shock their victims back into consciousness. Everything was tried from exposing parts of the body to open flames to severely dropping the body's temperature with ice, to even bloodletting from the head directly. One treatment even included wholly emptying the stomach, we guessed because the doctors thought that if a patient got hungry enough, the body would force them to wake up. Or maybe they really were just throwing everything including the kitchen sink at the problem, which we're sure was also tried. Tattoos have often been presented in popular media as either marks of the dangerous and deviant or trendy youth fads. But while tattoo styles come and go, and their meaning has differed greatly across cultures, the practice is as old as civilization itself. Decorative skin markings have been discovered in human remains all over the world, with the oldest found on a Peruvian mummy dating back to 6000 BCE. But have you ever wondered how tattooing really works? You may know that we shed our skin, losing about 30 to 40,000 skin cells per hour. That's about 1,000,000 per day. So, how come the tattoo doesn't gradually flake off along with them? The simple answer is that tattooing involves getting pigment deeper into the skin than the outermost layer that gets shed. Throughout history, different cultures have used various methods to accomplish this. But the first modern tattooing machine was modeled after Thomas Edison's engraving machine and ran on electricity. Tattooing machines used today insert tiny needles, loaded with dye, into the skin at a frequency of 50 to 3,000 times per minute. So the idea I'd like to propose today is this: one of the most effective ways of building strong fundamentals in students and preparing them for the future, ironically enough, is by looking to the past through the teaching of Latin. Latin will help students think more logically, communicate more effectively, and have a more comprehensive understanding of the world around them, no matter how technologically advanced that world may become. To begin with, let's address a common misconception that Latin is a dead language spoken by ancient European 2,000 years ago, holding no relevance whatsoever for people living in the 21st century. There's even an old poem that expresses the point of view. Latin is a language, as dead can be. First it killed the Romans and now it's killing me. Now students may feel this way sometimes, but this simply is not true. The reality is that Latin never died. It never came to a crashing end with the death of a single tragic figure. It simply evolved gradually over time and developed into the other languages. Moreover, classic Latin is still very much alive and well in government, art, religion, literature, medicine, law, and science.